It has been a barn burner of a week this week in Texas politics. Let's get the headlines from our panel, and we'll start first with Patrick Svitek with the Washington Post. Patrick, what's your headline for the week?
School vouchers, or school choice as supporters call it, is finally coming to Texas after a very long political battle.
Brad Johnson with the Texan News. Brad, what's your headline for the week?
It's crunch time in the Texas legislature.
And business analyst Annie Spillman, what's your headline for the week?
1 month in legislative session.
Governor Greg Abbott spent much of the week teeing up, trying to free up his bail reform idea. House Democrats reportedly have it all locked down for the time being as payback for the passage of school choice. Brad, this started out as a game of political chicken, could become a cage match, but, could a deal be hatched in the back room? Do you feel something's happening?
Well, of course, after the governor got his top priority in education savings accounts across the line, he moved on to other things, and the main thing is this bail reform package. I think this is probably has the biggest potential to force a special session. Republicans in the House have to get 12 Democrats to side with them on this. There are definitely negotiations going on. There are Democratic members that are whipping votes, trying to get enough support for this, contingent upon them getting some sort of deal in exchange for something else, or deal on the bail amendment itself. So we'll see what they get to. There's definitely potential to find common ground here. There's an Ann Johnson amendment that if I were Republicans and I just need something, I would say, all right, all Democrats bluff, let's advance that. Not sure that'll happen, but there's a month left, a lot of time left to figure something out on this.
This is all about fixing that revolving door for criminal offenders, repeat offenders. Annie, how does the business community feel about this? I've heard a lot of stuff from that side.
Yeah, well, look, let me first say that small business owners in particular are the first in line as second chance hirers, those giving folks with criminal history who have done their time and reformed a second chance to be part of society and gain important job skills. But yes, the business community has advocated on the issue. You've got chambers of commerce, industry groups have increasingly called on lawmakers to pass bill reforms to support, local economies, especially in areas where you see local governments that have tried to decriminalize retail theft at certain levels, almost incentivizing these smash and grab thefts. So bill reform in some aspects does reflect a commitment to fixing systematic loopholes that allow individuals to repeatedly commit crimes while out in bond.
Up on Capitol Hill, the crime talk has really been about immigration-related crime. Patrick, how does the Texas plan sync up with what's going on in Capitol Hill?
Well, right now on Capitol Hill, they're really reaching a critical juncture for this one big, beautiful bill that is going to include increased federal funding for border security, but it's wrapped in with a bunch of other issues, including extending Donald Trump's 2017 tax cuts. And so it hasn't really necessarily been front and center as a policy issue on Capitol Hill. But what continues to, I think, capture headlines in Washington is the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador. And you saw the administration this week really push back on revealing anything about their conversations with that country about potentially securing his return. As many people know, the Supreme Court has asked the administration to, quote, facilitate the return of this man. So far, at least publicly, the administration has been resisting that. And so there's still a lot of political intrigue around that issue in Washington.
The new Lyceum poll came out this week with the top three issues being immigration, rising problem with prices, inflation, and border security. The poll showed an improvement in how people view their economic situation. Annie, I think that that has a lot to do with the lower gas prices right now, but boy, things could really just flip on a dime, can't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me first note that I thought it was very interesting in that poll that Governor Greg Abbott polled in favoritism at about 55%, higher than the lieutenant governor, higher than Attorney General Paxton, and higher than the legislature. And then also in that poll, 68% of Texans want compromise rather than someone that's going to stand their ground. But let me follow up with your question. Listen, for small businesses in particular, uncertainty is so crippling. It's the enemy of entrepreneurship. These businesses have less of a financial cushion than larger businesses, and they struggle in this type of environment. When we're facing, tariffs that can really introduce cost unpredictability, and it makes it hard to, forecast margins, and especially in a product-based business. So it's definitely, it's a scary time right now.
Patrick, in the Lyceum poll, President Trump had good numbers, 54% approval rating, but other polls nationwide have him underwater. A lot of this is tariff turmoil. A lot of this is the immigration fight. What's your read?
Yeah, we have seen this trend in national polling where the president's approval rating has been in decline. And I think a lot of analysts look at that and tie that to the souring public sentiment around the economy, which goes hand in hand with what's going on with tariffs right now. Trump has just basically issued a blanket denial of these polls and, called them fake or some, similar adjective. Some of his allies in Congress have acknowledged that, the reality that his approval rating has ticked down in these polls, but they've sought to portray it as kind of a temporary trend as the economic uncertainty from tariffs continues to take hold. And they're obviously very optimistic that the president is going to strike some trade deals in the coming days, coming weeks with some countries that will, turn around not just the stock markets, but also the public opinion of the president.
Hey, Brad, the poll also indicate people are getting tired of all this political bickering. You saw a lot of political bickering going on here at the state capitol this week. Anything that really caught your attention?
Oh, I think the biggest thing that hit the Capitol was the announcement from Governor Abbott that Donald Trump was endorsing all of the Republicans who voted for ESAs. Now, that's itself is not surprising because the president said that earlier this month in a call to those members. But the biggest thing is it comes with an endorsement of Speaker Burrows as Speaker, not just in his re-election race. So, that really changed dynamics within the House. Those opposition members who were feeling pretty good about not how the session's going, but about how Burrows was not performing up to standard. It flipped on a dime, and all of a sudden the wind got taken out of their sails, and in turn, leadership is feeling pretty good. That's kind of it's a shield of armor for him, and going into the next cycle. That'll be on all the mailers. You can guarantee that. So it really has changed dynamics in the House right now.
Well, the online verbal boxing match continued this week between Senator John Cornyn and his party rival Ken Paxton. Meanwhile, fellow Republican Congressman Wesley Hunt continues to flirt with the idea of running for Cornyn's seat. Patrick, there seems to be a lot of Hunt ads on the air. Hunt had a White House meeting to talk about this reportedly, and he went to New Hampshire to do some kind of exploratory. What's going on with Wesley Hunt?
Yeah, Hunt and his allies politically are definitely trying to keep his options open in the context of this current Senate race. I think to them, they look at him as a solution to this kind of complex political puzzle you have here, where John Cornyn is vulnerable in a Republican primary to Ken Paxton, to losing the Republican primary to Ken Paxton. But based on limited polling, it suggests that Ken Paxton would be a weaker general election competitor for the Republicans than John Cornyn would be. And so the case here for Hunt is that he solves both of those problems, could win a primary and a general election. He has acknowledged that this is something he'd consider if there's, enough momentum behind the idea, but hasn't made any formal steps to run quite yet.
Meanwhile, the big name for a possible Senate run for the Democrats is a familiar name, Beto O'Rourke, and the race to replace Ken Paxton as AG, Republican John Bash, he dropped out this week. Brad, there is certainly a lot of pre-primary action going on. Are you surprised?
No, I don't think so. The next cycle is highly anticipated, and I think it shows that with how much action we've had so far, particularly with some of the open seats at statewide level. Dems currently are trying to figure out who's going to top their ticket. A lot of names going around. You mentioned Beto, you mentioned Colin Allred. There's other names like Joaquin Castro, State Rep James Tallarico, Jasmine Crockett. Who does it? I don't know, but Democrats need some hope at the top of the ticket in order to spur gains down ballot. And what they hope to be is kind of somewhat of a repeat of 2018. Now, they've been saying that for every cycle since 2018, and it hasn't materialized. But we'll see what the overarching political dynamics look like. On the Republican side, you had John Bash drop out. I'm sure we'll see some Republicans jump in from the state legislature after session once the fundraising moratorium lifts, and then the comptroller raise, the U.S. Senate raise. I mean, there's a lot of intrigue here, and things will really start to heat up this summer, I think.
Yeah, a lot of early uncertainty, which isn't great. But Annie, couldn't the business community maybe step in and maybe settle things down? Are you getting any feelings about that?
Oh yes, yeah. Everybody, everybody wants to look to the business community, business and industry community for some help. I'll tell you in that Cornyn race, I bet you there's already a bunch of consultants reaching out to the business community. You've got somebody there that's been an incumbent for a long time, that has a voting record, that's been pro-business, who's been endorsed by the business and industry community for a very long time. And I'm sure the business community's already been approached about endorsing early, and I wouldn't doubt if they've already committed to that. I mean, you've got someone there with a proven record.
Election reform certainly is a hot topic under the Capitol Dome. A bill by former Speaker Dade Phelan that cracks down on deep fake political ads moved forward. Brad, his detractors tried to claim that this bill was all about squelching free speech, going after nasty memes. But Phelan, he got hit with a lot of fake ads during his reelection bid. Who wins in this? I think Phelan won, right?
Well, first of all, this is not about memes. The bill itself is about the mailers that were sent into Phelan's district, and there's an argument to be made that it is a personal vendetta for him, and I think that's probably true. The bill passed, so first of all, more than anything, Phelan won that. Now there is a question about how the bill's current makeup and how broad it is, and if it would encompass anyone who posted a meme and then spent money to boost it on social media. I think that's a fair question, and we'll see how that gets meted out in the Senate. Also notable, the Senate passed a similar bill and passed it 30-0. So I think that shows appetite among both chambers to pass something on this. Question is, what does Governor Abbott do? Especially once it's on his desk and there's a lot of cage rattling on social media or elsewhere about this.
All right, so we had something similar up in D.C. on Capitol Hill. The Take It Down bill passed. It was pushed through by Senator Ted Cruz. Patrick, the focus on that bill was really on revenge porn, but could there be an attempt to kind of include at some point in time fake election ads too?
Yeah, you're right. That bill centered on what's referred to commonly as revenge porn, and there was overwhelming bipartisan support for it in Congress, and I believe it's headed to President Trump's desk right now. There was not any discussion that I noticed about extending that discussion to imagery that happens in campaigns or elections. Generally speaking, in Washington, and I think probably in Austin too, it is always hard to bring the two parties together on reforms to the way that elections or voting are run, or the rules that govern campaigns and campaign finance.
It's all about free speech, right, Annie? That's the slippery slope.
Yeah, and look, the business community is going to favor really any legislation that promotes transparency and disclosure. There can be a fine line where you've got, trolls out there looking to sort of sue a business that maybe uses AI for ads or for any sort of speech. So they might be able to try to find something within these types of legislation, but these are pretty particular at this point. And for the most part, I mean, these are all very well intended, and we need to crack down on people that are taking advantage of sort of kind of these loosely written and also just loopholes out there. So I think these are good pieces of legislation, and they'll benefit everybody and the business community.
We touched on the budget fight up on Capitol Hill, the congressional budget bill, that beautiful bill that President Trump has described. One item that has floated around was to create a new car fee as a step to eventually replace the federal gas tax. Patrick, Texas Congressman Chip Roy wasn't happy this week about how things on this bill have been playing out. What's his beef?
Yeah, not surprising there. Chip Roy is part of a group of severe fiscal hawks in the House Republican Conference who are overwhelmingly focused on trying to find federal spending cuts, not trying to find new ways to raise revenue or create new taxes or fees, as you alluded to. There's been a little bit of Republican chatter on, for example, the idea of maybe raising taxes slightly on the wealthy to pay for President Trump's proposal to end taxes on tips. But we've seen Republican leaders really tamp down on that proposal, and people like Chip Roy again are overwhelmingly focused on trying to find steep federal spending cuts rather than new ways to raise revenue.
The financial drama also taking place in the U.S. Senate, where Senators Cornyn and Cruz helping to block an effort by Democrats to hit the brakes on the Trump tariff war. Annie, the job numbers are up, but there's still a lot of concern about what tariffs will do and how long it will last, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So job numbers might be up, but as reported by, many of the business organization, the optimism reports are still very low. And as we talked about earlier, uncertainty can be very crippling for especially our small businesses. When you've got uncertainty, it keeps a business from investing back into their business, hiring more people, increasing wages, bonuses, buying more equipment. And I understand you've heard President Trump mention many times that he's got good intentions in trying to bring business back to small businesses or into America. But in many cases, small businesses, often buy their products from overseas in order to make their products here. At one point, I just a little story, I represented a small business that bought their yarn from Vietnam in order to make saddle blankets. And back when the ports were closed, they were pretty much out of business because that's what they used. They used the yarn from Vietnam, and the ports slowly opened, but that yarn went up about 500%. And this is what we're going to kind of see here. So businesses are scared, and it hampers what they can do to move forward.
Inside the Texas Capitol, I really haven't heard the word tariff that much, but I have heard a lot of people talking about the economic impacts down the road, Brad, and that we could be looking at maybe a budget problem.
Absolutely, yeah. Because the state budget relies so heavily on consumption taxes, that ebbs and flows with the economy, and it's just there's no other way around it. Coming to 2027, there's a lot of talk about, well, maybe we not just don't have a massive surplus, but maybe have either barely one or have a deficit. It's an open question, and it's something that legislators have to plan for. That's why we have a rainy day fund. Now, the impact here now is how much money do legislators spend on all the stuff that they want to put money towards? You got a bunch of infrastructure problems, you got public education, you've got all kinds of stuff that's on their plate that they're trying to take a bite at the apple on. How much do they keep in reserve? And one thing to watch, we've seen Lieutenant Governor Patrick want to raise the rainy day fund cap by 5%. I'm not sure what the appetite is for that in the House, but I think we'll probably see some movement on it. And it's a conservative item trying to prepare for the potential of economic downturn that in turn affects the state budget 2 years down the road.
Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick was in Washington, D.C. on Thursday. President Trump has picked him to head up a commission on religious liberty. This comes after the House had a marathon hearing here in Austin that included a bill allowing the posting of the Ten Commandments in classrooms. Annie, this has been somewhat of a bone of contention for you when we brought these kind of issues up. You want more debates on substance instead of posturing, right?
Yeah, well, what's new? I've been around the Capitol now for 25 years. And, listen, we all know that the main reason we go into legislative session is to pass a budget, and everything else is sort of auxiliary issues. But these people also need to get reelected. Republicans and Democrats need their base issues. And so that's what we've got that is sort of tangential to what we're doing. And so there's posturing. It's going to be done. Unfortunately, these issues have now sort of taken over a lot of the time. It's burning up the clock. And some of the real policy issues that we need to get done we might not get done. And in Texas, we have to wait another 2 years.
I'm getting the feeling that the religious right here in Austin at the Capitol, they don't feel like that their issues are being heard and moving forward. Do you get that feeling, or am I misreading this?
Well, the things left on the plate for them are, things like the Ten Commandments bill or the Prayer in Schools bill, that of course they've been wanting, and that's been passed by the Senate each of the last few sessions. It just hasn't passed the House, and now that a lot of the bigger social issues have been addressed in the last two special sessions, especially, now they're left to take some of the lower priority social issues, and these are them. And so now, as Annie said, Republicans need to get reelected. They need some red meat, and this is the red meat available. And so that's what they're going to, address. They'll probably pass something on this, I think, if for no other reason than to assuage the concerns of their voters in the GOP base.
Patrick, you covered the Texas Capitol during those big social issues time, and the Republicans were very unified. The lack of having that, other than the Ten Commandments, do you think that that's leading to a lot of the fracturing that's going on, or am I misreading that too?
I don't think that religious issues are necessarily a big fissure inside the Texas Republican Party right now. But I do think oftentimes you see the president or other leaders in the party put together these commissions, if only to do what you alluded to earlier, which is at least show a constituent group that they're being heard, they're being listened to. I'm not sure necessarily what all the substantive tasks are going to be in front of this commission, but just as a political matter, I did have to chuckle when I saw the announcement of this commission, given that Dan Patrick is heading it, a Texas official who's already very close with President Trump. It's like, how could he get closer? Why don't we create a commission, make him the head of it? So, I had to be amused by that.
Well, an interesting compromise is in the works at the state capitol, and regarding the THC products, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick wants to ban most of those products. Business groups want to say, hang on, there are some ways, let's just regulate them. Annie, do you have faith that this compromise is going to work, or is this just going to fall flat?
Well, you say compromise. I'm still hearing from, the hemp industry folks that there's not necessarily a compromise on the table. I will tell you this. What we've seen that's been voted out of the State House Affairs Committee is sort of a less than a brash hit than what you've seen come out of the Senate, which is a complete ban. From what I've been told, this is sort of a workaround ban. We're not completely done. There's still language that could be worked on the House floor. They still could potentially could go to conference committee. It looks like the House is more willing to compromise. There's time on the clock to do that. It seems like the House is less interested in making this a priority issue, and sort of shutting down a complete industry. And to go back to, talking about budget and funding and revenue and rainy day fund, listen, I think everybody has seen by now, this is an $8 billion industry. And you talk about, we can license this industry more, we can do a whole lot more, and we can use that money to pull it into different, factions into the state. Let's use what we have here. Let's regulate it a little bit more. The industry is totally for that. Let's not shut it down.
Brad, what are you hearing? Is this thing got legs?
I don't think there's any question that a total ban on THC is not passing, especially the House probably doesn't have votes in the committee to pass, let alone on the House floor. Question is, where do they meet in the middle? This 120, the bill went from 15 pages to 125 pages, the one passed by the House committee. So there's a lot of wrinkles to that, questions about whether it can even survive on the House floor with parliamentary rules and points of order. But I think we'll see something pass on this. We've seen the business groups within the industry, the THC industry, kind of splinter. They're trying to save themselves. You've got the beverage groups that want to keep that out of the bill and separate themselves from all the rest of the industry. So there's a lot of runway left on this. I think they'll settle on something. But if not, Patrick has said this is prime special session fodder.
Patrick, do you think that that this shows a shift in perception on marijuana, or an opportunity to shut the door down again?
So I haven't been closely following the policy debate in Austin, but just from our conversation and from what I've heard, big picture politically, I do think it is this debate over THC in Texas is a little bit of a reemergence of that social conservatism that we talked about in our last topic, which this social conservatism has kind of been, I would argue, a little bit on the decline in the Trump era, just given that Trump, if not in his policies, in his style, isn't exactly moral crusader. And so, there has been a little bit of a more libertarian tinted mindset taking hold in the GOP in the Trump years, where what people do in their private lives, whether it's drug use, recreational drug use, or other medicinal drug use or other private contact, that that's okay. We're not as concerned about that. But I do think in Texas, you're seeing with this fight over THC a little bit of a reemergence of that kind of social conservatism.
All right, here's the catch-all segment for our discussion. As I mentioned at the very beginning, it's been a barn burner of a week. We're entering the final month of the regular session. The frantic push to get bills through is on. We saw a ban on social media for minors, a bill that was sent to the governor that requires schools to use the common definition of anti-Semitism in student disciplinary procedures. And that follows the governor threatening to pull grants from San Marcos because of a proposed resolution that condemns Israel. Brad, what's the sleeper issue for you?
With this tort reform stuff, the fight on the airwaves is pretty brutal, and the legislature is looking at reforming the way judgments and lawsuits can be issued by juries in personal injury lawsuits. But this is becoming a statewide campaign. This is not just a lobby fight in the back rooms of the Capitol. People are getting blasted in their districts with pretty serious and over-the-top ads. And so it's really having an effect on members. But at the center of it is this really fascinating legal fight over just how lawsuits go through the court system. And, that's what I'm watching a lot down the home stretch. I don't know where they're going to settle on something, but I think they'll settle on some sort of version, when we hit the last week of session.
Annie, what caused a double take for you this week?
I think that people have sort of kind of forgotten about an issue that was brought up at the beginning of session and in the interim is the landlords' rights bills that you see, like the Apartment Association and some of those others that are pushing. And it got a low bill number. It's still making its way through. It's fairly likely to pass. You've got Senator Betancourt and Chairwoman Angie Chin Button that are carrying those. Those will likely make it to the governor's desk. And those are sort of the tenant squatter bills that'll make it, more reasonable and likely for landlords to be able to, protect their own properties and get the squatters out. That was a major issue at the beginning of session, sort of kind of went under the radar, and I think we're going to see that pop back up before the end of session.
Up at Capitol Hill, for me, I noticed that Dallas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett is trying to make a power play with some positions up there. Patrick, what's the sleeper for you up there?
Yeah, Crockett could be a contender for the soon-to-be open top Democratic spot on the House Oversight Committee, which is a very high-profile position to be pushing back against the Trump administration. So that's one issue that I'm watching. One issue that I'm watching, I think Brad alluded to this earlier, is what are Republican leaders in Texas doing to quietly try to guard against or prepare for the potentially protracted economic uncertainty from all of Trump's tariffs. Of course, Republican leaders in Texas are going to continue to publicly stand by Trump on that for the most part. But they are very well aware that their political fortunes in Texas are tied to the idea that the Texas economy is exceptional and just chugging along uninterrupted, regardless of what's going on at the federal level. And so I'm curious to see as this trade war continues to play out, what Republican leaders in Texas are doing, probably quietly, to try to prepare for the uncertainty of all that.
You can watch this full discussion on the Fox 7 YouTube page. But let's wrap up this discussion with one word for the week. And Patrick, we'll begin with you. What's your word for this week?
Tariffs, because it was top of mind from the last conversation.
Well, it's 2, but 1 month.
Well, I wouldn't describe this week, but I'd be hopeful for compromise.
And that is This Week in Texas Politics.